Hello and welcome to Fight and Fit. Today I'm joined by Michael Petrie, who's a breathing coach. How are you doing?
I'm good, Joe. Thanks for having me on. This is the first time I've done a podcast, so I'm nice and excited to get into it.
Yeah,
How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. Well, I saw your Instagram and I was interested straight away, and I was watching all the videos because obviously our box and like the idea
Yeah.
of that just by something as simple as breathing could improve my performance and like make such a big difference. Like interested straight away.
Yeah. So have you ever tried any breathing with your current training at the minute, or?
It's not something that I feel like I've ever been taught properly. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I come from a Muay Thai background, so I'm a Thai boxer as well as a breathwork coach. So that's how I actually got into it. Well, there's a few ways that I got into breathing, but one of the things was to supplement my training. And I don't know about your coaching, but a lot of coaches are quite old school. So when you say, I'm going
Yeah.
to do some breathing to improve my performance, it's not something that they're necessarily interested in. But when you get people to actually try it, they do feel the difference because it affects such a wide range of things. Everything from your mindset before going into the ring, and also when things get stressful outside the training, outside of the ring, and then going into performance, being able to manage your breathing. Everybody knows what the feeling of getting out of breath is like, and the ring is the last place that you want that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like I'm pretty much a beginner to all this stuff, other than the few videos I've seen. So where
Yeah.
where would I start? Do you know what I mean?
So the basic thing, me myself, I'm an oxygen advantage coach. So that's like a methodology that was developed by a guy called Dr. Patrick McEwen, and it was influenced by an older doctor from the Soviet era called Bucheko. So that looks at all the scientific aspects of breathing. So a lot of breath work, like Wim Hof and stuff like that, there is definitely scientific benefits to it, but it's more about having an experience, like getting body sensations, and then you get other like holotropic breath work, which is more to do with psychedelic or breakthrough experiences. But Oxygen Advantage really looks at the scientific method. So the very first pillar of Oxygen Advantage would be functional breathing. And functional breathing comes down to a nice acronym, which is LSD. So that's light, slow, and deep breathing. And that'll be done through the nose. So with nasal breathing compared to mouth breathing, there's a lot of benefits. And this is mostly when you're outside of the ring. With the people that I train to start with, I don't really, as they're sparring and as they go into actual fights, I don't look at getting them to breathe through their nose immediately because it's difficult. But outside of the ring, when breathing through your nose is essentially designed for breathing. With your nose, you have the hairs that work as a filter for bad bacteria and anything that's harmful trying to get in. You've also got the turbinates in your nose. That's a secondary filter system. It's unlike anything people could design in terms of engineering. When people are trying to make filtration systems, they can't actually design a filtration system that's as effective as the turbinates in your nose. So that's one thing for bolstering your immunity. The nose is important, but there's other elements that come into it as well. So your nose produces a gas called nitric oxide, and this is what comes more into the performance side of things. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator and a bronchodilator. So vasodilation means that it opens up your capillaries so that your blood can circulate freely and easily. And a bronchodilator means that you can open your airways. So on the surface of it, that doesn't really mean anything for performance. But if you think about what your body uses as an energy source, as you're fighting, as you're training, it's oxygen. So if you can get oxygen into your lungs and into your system more efficiently, and then the blood that's coming in and around your body is circulating better, you're going to be able to feed your body with oxygen so that you can perform aerobically more efficiently.
Yeah. So the thing is, whenever I try and like it's running when I've tried to breathe just through my nose, and I feel like whenever I'm breathing out through my nose, I'm just getting like covered in snot and everything, and it's horrible. And like I stick at it for a few minutes, and then like I feel like I need to breathe through my mouth. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so that's That's another thing that can happen when you increase your work rate, is your nose starts to get a little bit snotty, and that's because of that nitric oxide. So your airways start up here, and that's your upper airways, and then lower down is your lower airways. As they start to open, all the mucus that's trapped in there, that mucous membrane starts to run out, and it can be quite unpleasant. But the more that you use your nose and the more that you kind of push through that snotty phase, the less snotty you will get and the more effective it will be. It is just a case of persevering with that.
Yeah. And I've seen you working with some people as well, like training for breath work as well. So how would you incorporate like breath work into your training?
So there's a few things you could do, and it depends on what your schedule is like, if you have a fight coming up or not. But one of the first things I would say is introducing it into running. So as you're running, most of the time, unless you're doing sprints, you don't want to be training anaerobic capacity. So sprints is training that really high heart rate, and you're not using oxygen at that point as a fuel source. You're using muscle glycogen. So when you're running, you want to be running at a slower pace, and you want to be working aerobically. So you are using oxygen, and the nose is a good limiter of this. When most people switch from running with their mouth to running to their nose, they find it really, really difficult. And it shows that maybe their cardiorespiratory fitness isn't where they previously thought it was. So running is always the best place to start. Once you start to get confident with running, you can add it into bag work and you can add it into pad work. The one thing with punching is having a forceful exhale out the mouth tightens up your intercostal muscles, and it helps you have more of a forceful punch. So I wouldn't recommend completely replacing that, but you can start to breathe in through the nose as you're hitting and still breathing out through the mouth as you punch pads or punch the bag.
Yeah. Because I remember that's probably the only time I can remember being taught breathing. It's like whenever you're tired, in through your nose, out through your mouth, and then whenever you're punching, exhale with the punches.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing as well when it comes to exhaling. So a lot of people don't actually understand what the urge to breathe is. So if I was to ask you right now, if you were to hold your breath and you feel quite an intense urge to breathe, what do you think that is?
Like carbon dioxide or something like that.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's a build-up of carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide gets a bad rap as a greenhouse gas. Everybody's trying to reduce their carbon footprint, but carbon dioxide is produced by every single cell in your body. And it's because of a process called cellular respiration. So what happens is you breathe in oxygen, the oxygen goes into your blood and circulates around your body, and then it gets into your cells. And as it gets into your cells, it mixes with either carbohydrates or fats to make ATP, which is energy for your body. It's what keeps you alive. A byproduct of that process is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide goes back into your blood, and the level of carbon dioxide in your blood is what is responsible for releasing the oxygen into your cells and tissues. So in English, what that means is the better level of carbon dioxide you have in your blood, the more efficiently oxygen is going to get to your muscles, the more efficiently you're going to be able to punch, you're going to be able to work. And the other area that it's getting delivered to is your brain. So if you think about a fight, it's not just the physical aspect, it's the mental aspect as well. When you get tired, your thinking slows down. But if you're breathing properly, if you're breathing in through the nose to get sufficient oxygen into the blood, and you have a carbon dioxide tolerance that allows you to have a higher level of CO2, you're going to have a better level of oxygen going to the brain and to your muscles.
Yeah.
Does that make
that's yeah, I do. I understand. Yeah, about like the carbon dioxide and things. Because if you used to like if you dealing with higher levels of carbon dioxide, that'll benefit you for when you're really tired and things.
Exactly, and then that's where being aware of your breathing comes into it. So there's two things that I'd like to cover there. The first one is carbon dioxide tolerance. So because carbon dioxide is the urge to breathe, you can actually train your body to tolerate more carbon dioxide. So that means that you're essentially building a tolerance to breathlessness, which is a perfect thing. If you are more tolerant to breathlessness, you have a better tolerance to CO2, and your opponent doesn't, you'll be able to outwork them, and your body will still be sufficiently delivering oxygen, and you won't be losing control of your breathing in the ring.
Yeah.
So for CO2 tolerance, we've covered that it helps you be more aerobically efficient. The other thing that happens with CO2 tolerance is it improves your stress resilience. because the actual sensation of holding your breath, if you were to do it and hold your breath, it's quite a panicking feeling. It doesn't feel normal, and it doesn't feel natural. And that's because it actually works on a different circuit than your normal fear circuit. It hits like your reptilian brain and the brainstem, and it can really make you freak out. So as you start to train your CO2 tolerance, you're not only going to be less breathless, you're going to be able to tolerate stress, because as you're doing these exercises, you're starting to almost microdose high stress environments and training your body to remain calm, your heart rate to remain low, and to remain focused while you're doing that.
Yeah. So when you see like Usyk and things, where they're in the pool and they're holding their breath under the water, is that to deal with the CO2 tolerance? Is that training that?
That is why they are doing that. And the pool is another dynamic to that, because they're underwater and your body's not used to being underwater. It's another part of the fear center in the brain that they can start to train, so they can start to calm down and remain calm in stressful situations. Stress tolerance and the less breathlessness is a big part of CO2 tolerance. And that's for more in the ring performance. Another thing that having a high CO2 tolerance benefits people with is, as you're out the ring and go day to day, like your life doesn't stop after boxing. Like most likely people have jobs. Jobs can be stressful, relationships can be stressful. So it comes back to the oxygen delivery. If you breathe lighter, you're going to retain more CO2. You're going to have adequate oxygen delivery throughout the day. So you're going to have more oxygen going to the brain and body. So more energy, more focus. You're going to be calm because you feel satiated with oxygen. And the slow side of breathing starts to touch on something that we haven't mentioned, which is nervous system regulation. You have two sides to your nervous system. You have sympathetic, which is fight or flight, and you have parasympathetic, which is rest and relax or rest and digest. As you do a slow breath, a slow exhale, you start to engage more of the parasympathetic side of your nervous system. Regulating your nervous system helps you be a lot more calm, a lot more present outside of the ring. And then being calm and being present means that you can react properly when you're in the ring, and not just get hit and think, you know what, I'm just going to go completely mental.
Yeah. So I've seen the video you did about Israel Adesanya, where he stood there and you can see him breathing, and he's using his diaphragm. Is that? I didn't really understand the importance of using his diaphragm and things. So if you could explain that, would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So I got quite a lot of slack for that video as well, because the opposite side of the video was Conor McGregor not breathing very well. So a lot of people like Conor McGregor were a bit pissed off that I was commenting on his breathing.
Yeah. Well, he's known for not having the best stamina, though. Do you know what I mean? So it does make sense.
And I would bet, because he trains incredibly hard, that it does come down to how he breathes. So why Israel Adesanya was recovering so quickly and so well in that fight was he was first breathing through the nose. So you see him, he's standing upright, his spine is tall, and he's breathing in through the nose. We already spoke about how the nose has all the filters, it pulls air in more efficiently. One thing we didn't mention is, as you breathe in through your nose, there's more resistance, so it's slower. That means most of the oxygen, as it gets breathed in more slowly, actually reaches the lungs. So that's an important part of recovering, is getting oxygen into the lungs so that it can start to circulate around your body and bring your heart rate down. If you breathe through the mouth, you sometimes tend to lose about 20 to 30% of the breath that you're taking in, just because it's a lot faster and there's a lot less resistance. So the first thing that Israel Adesanya done right was he was breathing in through the nose and getting oxygen back into the system. The next thing he was doing right was activating the diaphragm muscles, like you said. So every single time you breathe, you have to involve the diaphragm in some regard, but most people will do it inefficiently, and you'll see their chest moving. Like, if that's another reason why mouth breathing is bad. See, if you just take a breath in through your mouth, what do you feel come up?
Yeah, your chest.
Yes. If you look at the human anatomy, the lungs aren't up here. So the lungs are down here, and that's where we want to be breathing. This is where your diaphragm is situated. So if you're to sit up straight and just breathe in through your nose, what's the first thing that expands?
It's like my stomach area.
Yeah, and that's because the diaphragm is basically, it's shaped like that, and as you breathe in, it pushes down and creates a reverse vacuum so that oxygen can come in to your lungs. And then as you breathe out, it comes back to its normal resting position. And that's where you breathe out. You breathe out carbon dioxide. So that's the second thing that Israel Adesanya was doing right, was breathing into his diaphragm. Another thing that he does really, really well, but it wasn't in that video, it was in the second video I made, is unload excess carbon dioxide. So we mentioned that carbon dioxide is helpful for getting oxygen into the cells and improving your stress resilience. But if you've been in a fight, you're really pushing almost to 100% of your work rate, there's going to be an excess of carbon dioxide that you need to get rid of so you feel less breathless. There's another video I made on him where he takes long, slow exhales out through the mouth, and that's the Kelvin Gastelum fight, which is arguably a lot harder of a fight than the original video that I made against the guy called Kim Loudon. So an ideal recovery breath for any fighter in between rounds would be to take a big breath in through the nose and into the stomach area, and then a long, slow exhale out through the mouth. So that's unloading CO2, and it's also bringing your heart rate down, which is both amazing for recovery. You get rid of CO2, which is the feeling of breathlessness, and you bring your heart rate down so that you're more ready to go again.
Yeah. So, like, whenever I'm in the corner, like in between rounds, it's not something I ever think of, my breathing, and it's something that I'm going to have to start doing now. But do you think it's something that should be taught more and spoke about more?
Absolutely. Not just for the performance benefits, it helps with focus a lot as well. As you start to get quite stimulated from the fight, you've seen it with fighters, like they won't listen to their coach when they go back to the corner, and it's because they're just so overloaded. The breath helps bring them back. If you just say to them, look, start to slow down your breathing, come back to your breath, and it gives them one thing to focus on, and then they can start to focus on more things. They can start listening to what their coach is saying. They can start to process what's just happened in the previous round, and then get ready to go out for the next round. And then as well, like how I got into breathing was I started to deal with anxiety. So I was struggling with anxiety, and I didn't really know what the problem was at the time, but it was because I was in high stress environment and I wasn't managing my stress, and I was training really hard. So I was just completely overloaded with stress. And I feel like a lot of young men and young women too struggle with anxiety, but it's actually just an overload of stress. And learning to breathe, learning to calm yourself, regulate yourself, and actually understand how you feel. That's another reason why I think that breathing should be kind of taught to everybody, not just athletes.
Yeah. So talking about breathing in that regard, would you say that's where the light breathing comes into it, and that's how you should deal with the stress?
Yeah, exactly. So it's different for everybody because everybody's at different levels. With CO2 tolerance, people that have chronic anxiety or chronic stress usually are really sensitive to CO2. If you speak to a lot of them, the fear that they have is like they have panic attacks because they feel like they're suffocating and they feel like they don't have enough air. But as we've learned, that sensation has nothing to do with air at all. The feeling of being breathless is a buildup of CO2. So if you're really hypersensitive to CO2 and you do light breathing, there's every chance that you're going to go into a full-blown panic attack. So there's not really one size fits all for breathing. For people that are experiencing severe anxiety, like I just mentioned, I'd say starting to switch to the nose. Breathing through the nose is the main thing, and starting to think about where they feel the breath, making sure that they're not feeling it in the chest and that they're feeling it down in their lungs. Another thing that happens when you breathe nice and deep is you start to stimulate the vagus nerve, which is the nerve that stimulates parasympathetic or rest and relaxation activity. So as you breathe through the nose, you're elevating that vagus nerve activation, and you're going to start to calm yourself down. And if you're chronically stressed or chronically anxious and you start breathing through the nose, there's every chance that you're just going to start to balance your nervous system a little bit more. So nose, slow breathing, and then once you get comfortable with that, starting to build up to that light breathing.
Yeah, and breathing through your nose just throughout the day, even when you're not particularly anxious, will that make a big difference as well?
What we say as breathwork coaches is to breathe through the nose all the time. There's other oxygen advantage coaches that think if you're not a professional athlete or you're not competing in a sport, there is no reason for you to ever breathe through the mouth. So you shouldn't be, when you're doing exercise, you should be staying within that aerobic zone and breathing in and out through the nose. Because there's breathing exercises that can get the benefits of anaerobic exercise. And I suppose that's something that we could go into next, is there's a popular technique from Oxygen Advantage that simulates training at high altitude. So I know a lot of boxers do that. I think Golovkin used to do his camps at Big Bear in California, which is up in the mountains. And I know that for the recent Leon Edwards-Usman fight, they were both using, Usman stays at altitude in Colorado, and Leon Edwards was using some sort of chamber to sleep in, which simulates altitude. So you can use breathing to reach a hypoxic state. And what hypoxia is a lack of oxygen in the blood and to the cells, which sounds quite severe. And over a long period of time, it is severe, and you don't want that. But you can use it in short bursts as a hormetic stress, similar to like an ice bath. And as you use that short-term hypoxia, your body starts to make adaptations to that stress. So the adaptation to that is what happens when you go hypoxic or in oxygen advantage. It's hypoxia of the blood, hypoxemia. Your brain realizes this, your body realizes this. You have anoxia, which is lack of oxygen in the kidneys, and that the kidneys send a signal to your brain to produce more EPO, which is a banned substance, but it's naturally produced within the body. It's the same as testosterone, how it's natural, but people can take it from steroids or whatever. This isn't drug cheating. This is completely, completely safe, completely natural. But your body signals to make more EPO. And the reason that people take EPO and use EPO is because it signals to your body to create more red blood cells. Red blood cells are the blood cells that carry oxygen. If you have more red blood cells, you can carry more oxygen. You have better cardio, and that's, everybody wants better cardio. And especially if you're at the end of a fight camp and you've exhausted your body to what it's physically capable of, and then you can naturally produce more red blood cells, that's going to give you a further edge.
Yeah, well, I remember seeing something where it was saying to sleep and like live at high altitude, but to train at low altitude.
Exactly.
They were saying that it would almost, you can't train as hard at high altitude as you would at a lower altitude.
Yeah, and that's true. That is the case, because if you think about the output of, like, you've got low oxygen, and oxygen is your energy source, it's going to be difficult to train. And what this breathing exercise essentially allows you to do is train as you normally would, but then you can do this as part of a warm-up, so that you have better performance going into a fight or just training in general. But as you sleep and as you recover, your body's creating more EPO, so you're creating more red blood cells. The maturation of red blood cells from an increase of EPO takes roughly 3 to 4 days. But you also get an immediate benefit from doing the strong breath holding, which is your spleen vents. So the spleen is like a blood bank. And what happens is it realizes that you're in a hypoxic state, so it releases the blood in the blood bank. And the blood in the spleen has a higher level of hematocrit, which is the measure of red blood cells, the total blood volume, and hemoglobin, which is the protein that carries oxygen. So this venting of the spleen there's studies, and it essentially proves that you can increase your VO2 max by about 10%. So it's 9.6% it's up to, which is basically 10%. So picture this: if you practice this exercise and it works well for you, say you're warming up, you're getting ready for a fight, and then just before you go out for a fight, you have a 9.6% increase to your VO2 max. That's massive.
Yeah, definitely. Well, because it's at the top level as well. Often it's only small percentages that separates them. Yeah,
really, really tiny amounts. Another person that was using the high altitude training recently was John Jones for his comeback fight, and it was on the UFC Embedded. They had he was working with a guy called Brian McKenzie, and you could see them doing the high altitude training. So it's definitely being used at the top flight. So it must work.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you work with a few Is it fighters you work with, or just like athletes and?
So I work with all athletes, but the majority of the people, because I have a Muay Thai background, majority work with Muay Thai fighters.
Yeah. So what kind of exercises will you put them through?
So I'll basically put them from start to finish through the oxygen advantage. So that looks at the two pillars of oxygen advantage are functional breathing, the LSD, and then stressor exercises, which is where you start to get this simulating of high altitude training. So when somebody comes to me, I'll do an assessment with them called the Bolt score, and then I'll do an exhale test as well. And this just gives me a measure of where they're at, because athletes, by their nature, they're competitive and they're strong-willed. So you can get somebody that has been training really hard, but is actually a terrible, terrible breather. And you might not think it by looking at them. So it gives me a good idea of what I'm working with. Once I've got a good idea of what I'm working with, it'll vary depending on where they're at, what I'll implement them with. But I'll give you kind of a blanket session. I would start to work on functional breathing with them. So I'd explain to them the fact that you knew about carbon dioxide is your leagues ahead of most people. Most people think it's oxygen, or they have no idea at all. So explaining to them the theory behind what we're going to be doing and why I want them to start to build a CO2 tolerance. Then I get them to start to look at awareness of the breath. We've mentioned all the reasons why breathing is good. It can help with your mindset. It can help with your performance. It can help with your resilience. But most people just aren't aware of their breathing. Like if you listen to your breathing, it'll tell you a lot. It'll tell you a lot about how exerted you are in the middle of a performance. It'll tell you how stressed you are outside of the ring. So getting them to really sit, be aware of their breath, and become comfortable with being aware of their breathing. And then I start to get them breathing light, get them breathing slow, so they can experience the change from they're aware of their breath now, they know what it looks like. Now when we start making changes to it, they start to feel that change because they have an awareness. They're not just blissfully unaware. They're aware of what's happening. They're aware of what they feel like. So I can start to give them tools to change that and make them feel better. That's another thing that comes into it. You have to work closely with people and closely with fighters because everybody reacts to different things differently. So what feels great for me might not necessarily feel great for you, but there will be something that will help you, and there will be something that makes you feel good and helps with your performance. And then it comes back to the Israel Adesanya stuff, getting them to properly use their diaphragm muscles, take them through a few rounds of different exercises with different stimulus, first getting them to close their eyes and use their hands to feel that expansion, then taking away the hands, maybe using a belt so they can feel the expansion, or getting them to look more within their body so that they build the same mind muscle connection you would have with your bicep, with your diaphragm muscles, so that you can really start pulling that stuff in there. And once they've got a good foundation of functional breathing, I'll start getting them to apply that to their training. So feeling comfortable through the nose with higher levels of CO2, getting them using recovery techniques to recover faster, and then also making recovery harder. There's something you could do to train your CO2 tolerance. Block your nostril up. If you do a round and block your nostril up, it'll be the hardest round recovery you ever do in your life. It's seriously, seriously difficult. But what does that do? Trains your CO2 tolerance. It trains your diaphragm to be stronger. You can pull more air in and recover quicker, which helps because you have two nostrils in real life. So you won't be in a situation where one nostril is covered. And once they've got comfortable with the fundamentals, they've started to implement the fundamentals, then I'll get them looking at some sports performance stuff and getting them that EPO boost, getting them comfortable with the venting of the spleen. Because that is a stressor exercise, and I like to build people up to that. And also, before they implement it in fights, I like to make sure that they've practiced it. Say you were to do a session with me right now and you had a fight 2-3 days down the line, I wouldn't get you to do that just because it's something that you really need to be used to doing and comfortable doing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I hope some people listening as well will find it interesting and hopefully can use some of the things like we've been talking about in their training.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes hard to pick up without actually seeing it. So if my Instagram has a lot of videos on how to start implementing really specific things, the actual picture of breathing and boxing is such a massive, massive topic. Like there's so many little tiny points that you could come to for everything from mental performance and recovery. So
yeah, well, I'll make sure put the link for your Instagram in the description below. I was just gonna ask, do you know, because you said that you were a Muay Thai fighter.
yeah.
Did you look like where did your interest in breathing come from? Like, did you use these techniques when you were fighting, or is
Yeah,
it something that you've sort of found afterwards?
I'll start from how I actually got into breathing. So it came from the anxiety, the panic attacks.
Yeah.
I had a really irrational fear of having a seizure because I seen somebody have a seizure, and it set off something in me because I was already hyper stressed and maybe had anxiety I wasn't aware of. That became my sole focus. Like, I was thinking about it all the time, and I was getting a lot of like persistent, repetitive thoughts that weren't good. So I got into breathing that way. I started with Wim Hof, and that started to help with the anxiety that I was having, but it wasn't really what I was looking for. And then I found the Bucheco method, which is the precursor to Oxygen Advantage. And I was reading about it online, and it was like, just breathe in light and slowly through your nose. And I'm like, you see breathing in movies, you see on Instagram, people are always doing these massive, big, like, it's almost like a shamanic ritual or something like that. I was like, how is this possibly working? But I was doing it before bed, I was doing it when I felt anxious, and I was feeling absolutely unbelievable. So that piqued my interest, and I'm like, there's definitely something in this. So I started to look to Bucheco and found Patrick McEwen, found the Oxygen Advantage. And this was around the same time that I was starting Muay Thai, but I was more focused on my anxiety, getting rid of my anxiety, and I wasn't actually fighting at this point. So I brushed that to the side, and then fast forward 2 years, I'm ready for my first fight, and then that's when I pulled the book out, the Oxygen Advantage, back out, and started looking at it, started applying it to my training, and then after my first fight, seeing how I felt, like the boy that I fought with Muay Thai, I'm not sure if it's the same with boxing. There's a lot of weight cutting. So I didn't cut any weight because I was none of the wiser, and the boy that I was fighting cut quite a lot of weight, so there was quite a size difference. But I still won the fight, and I won the fight because my cardio persisted, because I'd learned and practiced these techniques. So I thought, there's something in this, and then I started training and studying to become a coach, and then I applied it in my fights thereafter. And I started to apply it to some of my teammates' fights. And then even my brother had asthma, and he wasn't really able to, it was exercise-induced asthma. Started to work with him, and then he was able to start playing rugby and stuff like that. So it helps with all sports, but it has helped me tremendously.
Yeah, well, it's great. Hopefully not even like for boxing, people like can learn from this, and like it pretty much, it helps with everything in life, really, doesn't it? It's like it's something everyone breathes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's it. And because that's what most people say, they're like, why do I need a breathing coach? I've been breathing my entire life. And the example that I like to use, because I work mostly with fighters, is if you've got somebody in the gym that's hitting the pads and they've got their hands down, they're not going to get into sparring, they're not going to get into a fight and magically have their hands covering up. Their hands are still going to be down. So it's like, if you're breathing inefficiently, but you're still breathing, but you don't know the difference between what is good breathing, what's efficient breathing, and what breathing is really going to help you, you're never going to make that change. So you don't even necessarily need to hire a coach. It's just doing the bare minimum, changing to nasal breathing, starting to slow your breathing down, and just being aware of your breathing, noticing how it changes in different situations. If someday you're around a certain person that's stressing you out, and you notice you'll maybe be holding your breath, or your breath will be shallow and in your chest and maybe through the mouth, and it's like, okay, what did that guy say in that podcast? Start breathing through my nose, start breathing a bit slower, and you'll notice how different you feel. You'll really start to feel a lot calm. If you take a lot more calm, if you just take a few nasal breaths, you just feel the stress leave you, and it's a really useful tool.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think people will really enjoy this, because it's interesting. It was something that I'm really interested in, and I feel like I've learned a lot from speaking to you. So yeah, I've really enjoyed this.
Awesome, mate. I'm glad. We'll do a session. I'll give you a session at some point. We could just do it through Zoom, and you can see.
That would be great. Yeah, I'd really enjoy that.
Awesome, mate.